As Christians, one of the key objections that we're tasked with answering, especially as our culture grows further and further away from the things of God, is the question of abortion. The question of pro-choice versus pro-life. On one hand, our secular culture argues for the dignity of humanity. On one hand, we should have human rights. We should treat each other the way we would want to be treated. We should put things like the golden rule into action. We should be there for our fellow brother. We should take care of our own. And yet the same standard is not applied, and the same is not true if somebody has made what they deem to be a mistake and they've gotten pregnant and they decide to have an abortion. And recent statistics are pretty terrible. To be honest with you, there are those who are arguing, prominent figures who are arguing even today that we should be allowed to bring unwanted children back to the hospital, as it were, to have them aborted even after they've been born. And as a matter of fact, up to 28 days after they've been born. And this is where inevitably it's going to lead. Now, this is a radical example. Not everybody believes that way. But ultimately, this is the logical conclusion. If a human fetus can be aborted, if a baby, when inside of the mother's womb, can be aborted, then the logical next step is that a baby outside of the mother's womb should also be able to legally be aborted. And the way that we can distinguish this, and I didn't come up with this, I first heard about it from the Stand to Reason organization, and I think they may have even gotten it from somewhere else. But one of the easiest ways to really demystify this pro-choice versus pro-life debate is to just use a simple test. You saw it in the video title, called the S.L.E.D test. It's really, really simple. Just four simple arguments using the acrostic S.L.E.D, and we can determine from that whether or not a human fetus is actually to be considered a human being, a human baby. That seems like common sense, but in this post-truth culture, the argument is that the potential for life is not the same thing as life. So this is a really interesting departure from truth that's being made in this case. Here's the test. When you're in a conversation with somebody in a pro-life, pro-choice discussion, and they're just pressing you hard on this, the real key is there a difference or is there not a difference between a human baby when it is inside of the mother's womb or when it is outside? That's the difference. That's the question. And this test helps to establish that. It's four things. So we start off with S, the size of the child. And we just ask a simple question. Does the size of the child have anything to do with its value? Is the intrinsic value of the child based in any way upon the child's size? Well, the answer to this question should be an obvious no. My son is no more valuable now that he is the size that we would associate with a 2-year-old child, rather, than when he was the size of a 1-year-old child. To be even more specific, my boys are about 14 months apart, and my older son is no more valuable than my younger son because of their size. There's no reason to think that. So size is not a factor. You can especially see this in the fact that some children are much smaller than they ought to be for the age that they are. That doesn't mean that human is less valuable or even if they're any less human. So size isn't going to get it. So we can't reduce the baby down. We can't say that just because the baby can fit into the palm of our hands that it's not a human baby, because size doesn't factor in. Well, what about the second thing, which is the level of development, the level of development. So, just because a child is less developed than another child has nothing to do with the value. To use my same illustration, or to capitalize on humanity, okay? Value and humanity have nothing to do with level of development. I've met some people who are 50, 60 years old and their brains just never have developed in the way they ought to have, right? That's an obvious problem. So the level of development is nothing that should have to do with the value or the humanity of a child. If my son happens to, if my older son happens to be really smart, and my younger son happens to grow up and not be as smart, or vice versa, to be fair, neither of those things are going to affect the humanity of my sons. They are both still my human sons. Their level of development will not factor in. And then there's the environment. Now, this is a big one. Does the environment matter? Does the environment that our kids find themselves in, does that have anything to do with their intrinsic value, with their worth, or even with their identity as a human being? Well, that would be absurd. It doesn't matter if my son is here or if my son is in Argentina. Of course, that's going to hurt me. I don't want my son to be in Argentina. But the point is that he's not any less valuable because he's in Argentina. For that to be the case, that would actually be human discrimination. We can't just say he is subhuman now because he is in a different location. So that doesn't work. That doesn't play out. And then finally, we're almost done. This is 3/4 of the argument. And here's the rest of it. D, the degree of dependency. The degree of dependency. Does the fact that the child is being nurtured through the umbilical cord, does the fact that the child is dependent upon the body of the mother make it any less human? Well, of course not. Because some babies are born prematurely insofar as that they have to come out of the womb, but they still require life support, right? But what about when the child gets older? What if a tragic accident happens and the person is placed on life support? Are they any less human? Do they hold any less value because they're unable to support themselves? Of course not. The same, when you have a baby, even if it is fully developed and regularly rather developed, as soon as the baby comes out of the mother's womb, it is still dependent on the mother. As a matter of fact, because of the high costs, some countries don't even allow you to purchase formula. Formula is not available. So breastfeeding is required. Now, obviously, this means that the degree of dependency that one has upon someone else does nothing to diminish the value or humanity. So where does this lead? And again, this is not original to me, but I feel it's important. I want to get it out there for as many people as possible so you know how to think about this. But just these 4 simple issues actually show that not only is pro-choice a defunct option, that the argument for it is non-existent. These 4 things demolish any kind of argument for it. But actually it demonstrates that pro-choice is a form of discrimination against other human beings. That's what it actually is. It's a form of discrimination. So don't let these, and there's so many moral things here, and I don't want to go much further, but there's moral things that come into play. People try to bring in these different situations. Well, what if it's the life of the baby or the life of the mother? Look, as a rule, and there's more we could say about that, but as a rule, you never interpret something, interpret a scenario or a proposition or whatever in light of its exceptions. The exception should never become the rule, and that's the case here. So remember, size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Human fetuses are just that, human